The courtroom fell silent as Mara stood before 200 eyes, her hands trembling on the wooden box. 8 months pregnant and pale as death. She faced the man who'd haunted her nightmares for half a year. Luther Blackwood sat in chains, his face drained of color. She lifted the lid. Inside lay yellowed documents that would either save a town or condemn it to ruin. Her fingers brushed the paper's 15 years of secrets, blood, and sacrifice. The wedding gift her husband had hidden in darkness while the world called him cursed. But Rowan wasn't here to see this moment. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. McAllister, what have you brought us?" Mara's voice cracked. This wedding gift didn't just save our land, it exposed 15 years of murder. The box opened wider. Everything changed. 6 months earlier, she'd never imagined marrying a monster. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Let's continue with the story. Redemption Springs wasn't much to look at, just 300 souls clinging to the edge of Apache territory, where the Arizona dust turned everything the color of old blood. The town survived on stubbornness and prayer, its wooden buildings baking under a sun that showed no mercy. Most folks worked land that barely gave back, their hands cracked and their hopes worn thin as their children's hand-me-down clothes. Mara Sullivan knew that life better than most. At 19, she'd already buried her mother and watched her father age 20 years in half that time. William Sullivan's small farm produced just enough vegetables to sell at the Saturday market, and Mara stood beside him every week. Her worn dress mended so many times, the original fabric was hard to find. But her books, those she kept pristine, wrapped in cloth and hidden like treasures. Teaching school was her dream, the only light in a future that looked increasingly dark. The day Luther Blackwood rode into town, that future shifted on its axis. He arrived with the spring heat, dressed in clothes that cost more than most families earned in a year. His gold watch caught the sunlight as he walked through the market, and his smile was practiced, perfect. A businessman from back east, he told everyone, here to bring progress and prosperity. He'd build a railroad, create jobs, transform their dusty corner of nowhere into something that mattered. People wanted to believe him. Desperation made them blind. Mara first felt his eyes on her while selling carrots. She looked up to find him staring with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "A flower like you shouldn't waste away in dirt," he said, his voice smooth as snake oil. Her father's hand tightened on her shoulder, a warning, a protection. But Luther Blackwood wasn't a man who heard the word "oath." The other shadow over Redemption Springs had a different name, Rowan McAllister. The townspeople spoke of him in whispers, as if saying his name too loud might summon something terrible. He lived 15 miles into the forest, in a cabin no decent person would approach. They called him the Cursed Lumberjack. Trading rumors like currency, he'd killed his family for hidden gold, made a deal with dark forces, murdered anyone who ventured too close to his territory. Mara had seen him once from across the market square, tall and broad-shouldered, his arms marked with scars that disappeared beneath his sleeves. He'd bought supplies with few words, his face a mask of stone, his eyes holding something she couldn't name. Sadness, maybe, or secrets too heavy to share. The crowd had parted around him like water around a rock, everyone keeping their distance from the man who chose isolation over community. She'd felt afraid of him then. She had no way of knowing that fear would save her life. The dead arrived on a Tuesday evening when the heat still shimmered off the hardpan earth. Luther Blackwood stepped onto the Sullivan porch with two men flanking him and a rolled document in his hand. His smile hadn't changed, but something predatory lurked beneath it now. "William," he said, as if they were old friends, "we need to discuss your obligation." Mara's father went pale. "What obligation? I don't owe you nothing." Luther unrolled the paper with theatrical slowness. "This contract says otherwise. $300. Borrowed last autumn. Due in full by week's end." "That's a lie, I never." "Your signature says different." Luther held up the document. There, in ink that looked disturbingly like her father's hand, was a name and a promise. William's hands shook as he examined it. "This is forgery. I never signed this. Tell that to Sheriff McAllister. I'm sure he'll be interested in your version of events." Luther's smile widened. "Of course. The law tends to favor documented agreements over desperate denials. You have 7 days. William, after that, this land becomes mine." $300 might as well have been 3,000. They didn't have 30. After Luther left, Mara found her father sitting in the dark, his face in his hands. She'd never seen him cry before. The sound broke something inside her chest. "We'll figure it out, Papa. There has to be a way." But they both knew better. In Redemption Springs, Luther Blackwood's word was law, and Sheriff McAllister had been in his pocket since the day he arrived. Luther returned 3 nights later. Alone this time. The moon hung low and red, and Mara heard his boots on the porch before his knock. She opened the door to find him leaning against the post, that same calculated smile playing at his lips. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said, "and I believe I have a solution that benefits everyone." William appeared behind Mara, his shotgun in hand but pointed at the floor. "Get off my property." "Hear me out first." Luther's eyes slid to Mara, lingering in a way that made her want to hide. "Your daughter is a rare beauty in this godforsaken place. I'm a wealthy man with certain needs. Marry her to me as my 4th wife, and I'll forget the debt entirely. She'll want for nothing. You'll keep your land." The words hit like a physical blow. Mara felt her father's hand grip her shoulder so tight it hurt. "She's 19 years old, you bastard. Old enough to make her own choices." Luther's gaze never left Mara's face. "Think about it. 7 days. William, the offer expires with the debt." He walked away whistling. That night, their barn caught fire. By the time they doused the flames, 3 goats were dead and half their winter hay was ash. No one in town would say who they'd seen near the Sullivan property, but everyone knew. Luther Blackwood didn't make idle threats. Mara barely slept. Every shadow looked like Luther. Every sound was his footsteps coming back. She'd seen his other wives in town, silent women with dead eyes and bruises they tried to hide. That would be her future if she said yes. But if she said no, her father would lose everything. They'd be homeless, destitute, at Luther's mercy anyway. There was no good choice, only different shades of terrible. On the 5th day, when hope had burned down to nothing but ash and desperation, Rowan McAllister appeared. Mara was drawing water from the well when she heard the wagon. She looked up to see the man himself climbing down, taller than she remembered, his face weathered and marked with old pain. He walked like someone carrying an invisible weight. Her father came out with the shotgun again. "I'm not here for trouble," Rowan said, his voice rough from disuse. He stopped 10 feet away, keeping his hands visible. "I'm here with a proposition. We don't need nothing from you. You need $500. Rowan reached into his coat slowly, pulled out a leather pouch. "I'll pay that for your daughter's hand in marriage." The world tilted sideways. Mara gripped the well's edge to stay upright. William's laugh was bitter and broken. "You're insane." "I'm practical." Rowan's eyes found Mara's, and she saw something unexpected there, not cruelty or hunger, but a deep, aching loneliness. "I need a wife. She needs protection from Luther Blackwood. This arrangement serves both purposes." "How do you know about Luther?" "I know everything that happens in these parts. I know he's got your daughter marked. I know what happens to women he marks." Rowan's jaw tightened. "I'm offering her a way out, a home in the forest, away from him. I won't hurt her. I won't touch her if she doesn't want. But I will keep her safe." "And why would you do that?" Mara found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. "Because some men protect, and some men destroy. I've seen enough destruction." William pulled Mara inside. They sat at the kitchen table as the lamp flickered, throwing shadows on the walls like restless ghosts. Her father's face looked ancient in the weak light. "I can't make this choice for you, baby girl." But they both knew she had no choice at all. Luther would take her and destroy her father. Rowan offered mystery and fear, but also distance and safety. The devil you didn't know versus the devil who'd already shown his hand. Mara thought of Luther's cold smile, his possessive stare, the dead look in his wives' eyes. "I'll marry him," she whispered. "I'll marry Rowan McAllister." Her father wept. That night, Mara wrote in her journal by candlelight, her hand shaking so badly the words barely formed. "Tomorrow I marry a stranger. God have mercy on my soul." The morning of her wedding. Mara woke before dawn and couldn't remember falling asleep. Her wedding dress hung from a nail on the wall, the same dress her mother had worn, yellowed with age and smelling of cedar and lost dreams. She put it on with numb fingers, each button a small surrender. The church was empty except for shadows. Reverend Thatcher waited by the altar with a face like a funeral director, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Her father stood beside her in his only suit, the one he'd worn to bury her mother, and that felt like an omen she couldn't ignore. Morning light filtered through the dusty windows in pale streams that did nothing to warm the space. Rowan arrived exactly on time, wearing a vest that had been carefully mended and boots polished to a dull shine. He'd made an effort, she realized. Tried to look presentable for her, but nothing could hide the scars that ran from his jaw down into his collar, or the deeper wounds that lived behind his eyes. He nodded to her once, a gesture that might have been respect or simply acknowledgement, and took his place beside her. No one else came. The townspeople were too afraid of the cursed lumberjack to witness his wedding, too superstitious to risk whatever darkness clung to him. Only one other person watched from the back pew, Luther Blackwood, his face carved from rage and thwarted desire. His stare burned into Mara's back throughout the ceremony like a brand. Reverend Thatcher rushed through the vows as if the words might contaminate him. When he reached the part about speaking now or forever holding peace, the silence stretched so long it became its own kind of torment. Luther stood slowly, and Mara's heart stopped, but he only smiled his terrible smile and walked out, his footsteps echoing like a promise of future reckoning. Rowan produced a ring from his pocket, tarnished silver, old and worn smooth. As he slipped it onto her finger, she saw his hands, scarred and calloused. Yes, but gentle, careful. He held her hand like something fragile, something precious, and released it the moment the ring was seated. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thatcher said without enthusiasm. Rowan looked at her, a question in his eyes. Mara gave the smallest shake of her head. He nodded and turned away. No kiss, no celebration. Just her father pulling her into an embrace that felt like drowning, his tears soaking into her shoulder. "Forgive me," William whispered, broken and desperate. "God forgive me, child." She couldn't find words to comfort him, couldn't tell him it was all right when nothing would ever be all right again. The wagon waited outside, hitched to a sturdy mare that looked better fed than most people in Redemption Springs. Rowan helped her up with the same careful touch, then climbed up beside her. Her father handed up a small bag containing everything she owned, 3 dresses, her mother's Bible, and the books she'd treasured all her life. They rode out of town in silence. Behind them, Mara felt rather than saw Luther watching from the saloon steps. His gaze followed them until the buildings disappeared behind hills that rose like the walls of a prison closing in. The journey took 4 hours. They traveled through grassland that gave way to scrub oak, then into pine forest that grew denser with each mile. The path became little more than wagon ruts through wilderness, and civilization fell away like a discarded skin. Birds called overhead. Wind moved through the trees with sounds like whispered warnings. And beside her, Rowan said nothing at all. She studied him when she thought he wasn't looking. His profile was hard, carved by weather and grief into something that might have been handsome once. The scars that marked his neck continued down beneath his shirt, and she could see the edges when he moved. Burns, she thought. Old ones. The kind that told stories of fire and agony. Halfway through the journey, he stopped the wagon near a clearing. Wildflowers grew there in defiant splashes of color against the brown earth. Rowan climbed down and gathered a handful, then walked to a spot beneath an old cottonwood. He laid the flowers on the ground with a tenderness that made Mara's throat tight. He stood there for a long moment, head bowed, lips moving in words she couldn't hear. Then he returned to the wagon without explanation, and they continued deeper into the forest. The cabin appeared suddenly, as if the trees had hidden it until the last possible moment. It sat in a clearing surrounded by pines, built solid from hand-hewn logs that had weathered to silver gray. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone Rowan, she realized, had come ahead to start a fire, to make the place warm for her arrival. He helped her down and carried her bag to the door. Inside, the cabin was smaller than her father's house, but surprisingly clean. A table and 2 chairs, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, shelves lined with books and a few dishes. Everything organized with almost military precision, as if strict order was the only thing holding chaos at bay. "Your room," Rowan said, opening a door to reveal a small bedroom. A bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a window overlooking the forest, a trunk at the foot of the bed. "The door has a lock on the inside. Use it if you want. I won't enter without permission." She stared at him, searching for the trap, the hidden cruelty. Found none. There's food in the pantry. Help yourself to anything. Water barrels outside. Stays cold from the spring. He spoke in short sentences, as if he'd forgotten how to make conversation. I'll be in the workshop most days, if you need something. Ring the bell by the door. Where do you sleep? The question escaped before she could stop it. He gestured to a door on the opposite side of the cabin. There, you'll have privacy. Privacy. The word felt strange, almost foreign. She'd expected ownership, possession. Instead, he was offering her space, autonomy. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. Rowan moved to leave, then paused. I know you're afraid. I know what people say about me. But I give you my word, you're safe here. Safer than you'd be anywhere else. He left her standing in the main room, closing himself in his own quarters. She heard nothing from beyond his door. No movement, no sound. Just silence pressing in from all sides. Mara explored slowly, touching things carefully as if they might vanish. The books surprised her philosophy, law, literature, not what she'd expect from a simple woodsman. On one shelf sat a set of dishes for 4 people, covered in dust so thick it must have been years untouched. She ran her finger through the dust and found delicate china beneath, painted with small blue flowers. A family's dishes, now gathering dust in a home that felt more like a tomb than a house. Outside the kitchen window, she noticed strange shapes in the underbrush. Looking closer, she realized they were traps carefully concealed, surrounding the cabin in a protective ring. Not animal traps, people traps. The kind designed to warn of intruders or worse. What was he protecting, or who was he hiding from? Night fell quickly in the forest. Mara retreated to her room and locked the door as Rowan had suggested. She sat on the bed, still wearing her wedding dress, unable to move beyond that. The sounds of the forest at night were nothing like town animal calls she couldn't identify. Wind that sounded like voices, branches scraping against the cabin walls. At 3 a.m, she heard Rowan's door open. Her heart hammered as footsteps crossed the main room. Then the front door creaked. She crept to her window and looked out. Rowan stood in the moonlight, 50 feet from the cabin. His face turned skyward. He held something in his hands. She couldn't see what. His shoulders shook. Even from this distance, even in the darkness, she could see he was crying. Silent, wrenching sobs that he thought no one would witness. He stayed there for nearly an hour, holding whatever was in his hands, mourning something or someone in the privacy of darkness. When he finally returned inside, his footsteps were heavy with exhaustion. Mara sat on her bed, no longer afraid. She was married to a man in so much pain, he could only let it out when he thought he was alone. A man who surrounded his home with traps, but gave her a room with a lock. Who paid $500 for a bride, but offered her freedom. She didn't understand him, didn't know what tragedies had carved those scars or what secrets he protected with his isolation. But watching him cry alone in the moonlight, she realized something fundamental. Rowan McAllister wasn't the monster the town believed. He was just a man so broken that solitude felt safer than connection. She pulled out her journal and wrote by candlelight, "I've married a ghost who haunts his own life. God help us both." The first week passed in a strange rhythm that felt nothing like marriage and everything like cohabitation with a considerate stranger. Rowan rose before dawn each morning, and by the time Mara emerged from her locked room, coffee sat waiting on the stove alongside whatever breakfast he'd prepared. Biscuits and eggs, cornmeal porridge with honey. Simple food, but more than she'd expected from a man living alone in the wilderness. He'd be gone by then, somewhere in the forest with his axe and his silence. She'd hear the distant sound of wood splitting, a steady rhythm that marked the hours. He'd return at midday, eat lunch without speaking beyond basic politeness, then disappear again until evening. But in those small interactions, she began to notice things. The way he always served her first. How he'd repaired the broken leg on her chair before she'd even mentioned it, wobbled. The wildflowers that appeared on the table each morning, simple and unpretentious, placed there while she slept. He never asked about her past or her fears. Never demanded anything. Just existed parallel to her, giving her space to breathe in a life that had tried to suffocate her. The evenings were when he taught her, not because she asked, but because he seemed to understand she needed purpose beyond waiting for a life to begin. "You need to know how to survive out here," he said one night, showing her how to build a proper fire. His hands guided hers, patient and impersonal. "If something happens to me, you can't depend on anyone else. What would happen to you?" The question came out smaller than she intended. His jaw tightened. Forest is dangerous. Bears, sometimes other things. But the traps around the cabin weren't for bears, and they both knew it. He taught her to filter water, to identify which plants were safe to eat and which would kill her. How to use the rifle he kept by the door, though his hands shook slightly when he showed her how to load it. Some old memory, she thought. Some trauma wrapped around the weight of weapons. On the 10th day, curiosity overwhelmed caution. While Rowan worked in the forest, Mara explored beyond the immediate clearing. She found his workshop tucked behind a stand of pines, a sturdy shed with light streaming through the windows. Inside, wonder waited. Wooden toys covered every surface, horses with flowing manes carved in exquisite detail, dolls with painted faces and jointed limbs. A train set that must have taken months to complete. Each piece was perfect, crafted with a skill that spoke of endless patience and deep love. For the children in town. Rowan's voice came from behind her. She jumped, but he didn't seem angry at her trespass. "The poor ones. I leave them outside the church on Saturday nights. But everyone's afraid of you. Which is why I leave them at night. They don't need to know who made them. They just need something beautiful." He picked up a half-finished doll, his scarred fingers gentle on the wood. Every child deserves something beautiful. She saw it then, the depth of his loneliness. He gave gifts to children who would fear him if they knew the source. Spent his isolation creating joy for others while accepting none for himself. "You could tell them," she said softly. "Let them know who you really are. They know who I am. The cursed lumberjack. The monster in the woods." His smile was sad and ancient. Sometimes it's easier to be the monster they expect than the man they can't understand. Throughout the week, she noticed other things. Food supplies that appeared at the forest's edge every few days. Flour, salt, dried meat. Rowan would pack them in cloth bags and disappear for hours. When she asked about it, he simply said, "For people who need it." She followed him once, keeping far enough back that he wouldn't notice. Watched as he left the bags near the homes of widows and families she recognized from town. People whose husbands had died in mining accidents, or children who wore clothes held together with prayer. He never knocked, never announced himself. Just left the supplies and vanished back into the forest like a ghost doing penance. The books puzzled her most. His collection wasn't what a simple woodsman would own: legal treatises, philosophy, works in Latin. She found volumes of case law with notes in the margins, written in an educated hand. Whoever Rowan McAllister had been before he became a hermit, he'd been a man of learning and refinement. One evening, she found him reading by lamplight, his finger tracing lines in a book of poetry. He looked up, caught her watching. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Whatever life you had before?" He closed the book slowly. "Every single day. But missing something and being able to return to it are different things." "What happened to you?" For a moment, she thought he might tell her. His mouth opened, words forming and dying unspoken. Then he shook his head. Some stories are better left buried. But she could see the weight of that buried story crushing him. Could see how isolation had become both protection and prison. On the 20th day, everything changed. Mara was hanging laundry when the old man emerged from the tree line. She froze, hand on the rifle Rowan had taught her to carry. But something in the man's bearing weathered dignity. Eyes that held ancient wisdom made her pause. "I am Delson," he said in careful English. "Friend to Rowan." Before she could respond, Rowan appeared from the workshop, moving faster than she'd ever seen him move. The transformation was startling. His face opened into something like joy, his arms embracing the old man like a brother. For the first time since she'd known him. Rowan laughed. They spoke in low tones, a mixture of English and words she didn't understand. Apache, she realized. Rowan spoke Apache fluently. Another piece of the puzzle that was her husband. Delson studied her with eyes that seemed to see past skin into soul. He said something to Rowan that made her husband glance at her with an expression she couldn't read. Hope mixed with fear, mixed with something tender. That evening, while Rowan fetched water, Delson spoke to her in the quiet way of elders sharing vital truths. You wonder who he is, who the man you married truly is. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. 15 years ago, Rowan McAllister was a great man in the East, a lawyer who fought for those with no voice. When my people were being driven from our land by lies and greed, he stood before judges and spoke truth. He won for us what everyone said was impossible legal protection for our sacred ground. Mara's breath caught. He saved your tribe. He saved more than that. He saved the proof documents that guarantee our land forever. Delson's face grew dark. But there were men who wanted that land. Powerful men who don't forgive being defeated. Luther Blackwood, she whispered. The old man's eyes sharpened. You know this name. He tried to force me to marry him. That's why. She gestured at the cabin, at the strange life she'd fallen into. Then Rowan saved you from the same man who destroyed him. Delson shook his head slowly. The man who wanted our land took everything from Rowan. His family, his life. Left him with nothing but scars and secrets. What secrets? The documents he protected. The proof of our land rights. Luther Blackwood has searched for them for 15 years. If he finds them, he destroys them. If he destroys them, my people lose everything. Rowan keeps them hidden, keeps himself hidden, because his life is the lock on that box. The weight of it settled on Mara like snow. Her husband wasn't just a hermit. He was a guardian, sacrificing everything to protect people who didn't even know he existed. Why did he choose me? The question escaped raw and honest. Delson smiled, and it transformed his weathered face into something luminous. Because he sees light in you. Because 15 years of darkness taught him to recognize dawn when it finally comes. He prayed for you for months before he ever knew your name. Prayed for someone pure enough to trust, strong enough to protect. I'm not strong. You married a stranger to save your father. You locked your door for 3 weeks, but never once demanded to be taken back. You followed him into wilderness with nothing but faith that he meant what he promised. Delson's hand covered hers, papery and warm. That is strength. Be patient with him. The walls he's built took 15 years to construct. They won't fall in days. When Rowan returned, Delson stood to leave. The two men embraced again, and Delson whispered something that made Rowan's eyes glisten. After he left, Mara and Rowan sat by the fire as night settled around them. For the first time, the silence between them felt comfortable rather than strained. "Are you happy?" she asked, surprising herself with the boldness. Rowan stared into the flames for a long time. "I forgot what happy felt like. But these last weeks, I remember little pieces, like sunlight through trees. You're helping me remember." He stood, moved to his workshop, and returned with something wrapped in cloth. Inside was a doll carved in impossible detail, its wooden face painted with care, dark hair like Mara's, a dress like her mother's wedding gown. "For you," he said simply. "If you want it." She took it with trembling hands, seeing in its craftsmanship all the words he couldn't say. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for trying. Thank you for being here when I'd given up on here meaning anything." "It's beautiful," she whispered. That night, for the first time, Mara left her door unlocked. A small gesture, a tentative trust. In the morning, she found another wildflower on the table, not just any flower, but a rare mountain lily that only grew at high elevations. He'd climbed far to find it, she realized. Climbed far to bring her something precious. The cabin in the forest was starting to feel less like exile, and more like something she couldn't quite name yet. Something that felt dangerously close to home. The calm shattered on a sweltering afternoon when riders came from town bearing news that would set everything ablaze. Luther Blackwood had called a meeting in the town square, and what he announced there sent shockwaves through every home in Redemption Springs. He owned their land. All of it. Standing on the steps of the saloon with documents in hand, Luther declared that he'd purchased 15,000 acres from the territorial government land that included the entire town and every farm surrounding it. The papers looked official, stamped and sealed, dated years before most families had even arrived. He gave them 30 days to either pay rent of $50 per family per year or vacate the property they'd spent their lives building. $50 might as well have been $500. Most families survived on less than $100 annually. The math was simple and devastating. They couldn't pay, which meant they'd lose everything. Their homes, their land, the graves where their dead lay buried. When William Sullivan stood to protest, his voice shaking with righteous anger, Luther's men beat him in the street. They broke his ribs as while Sheriff Owen McAllister watched from the shade, doing nothing. The message was clear as blood on dusty ground. Resistance would be met with violence, and the law belonged to whoever could afford to buy it. Word reached the cabin by evening. A breathless boy, no more than 12, ran the 15 miles through the forest to find Rowan. His father had been one of the men who tried to help William, and Luther's thugs had burned their barn in retaliation. "Please," the boy gasped. "They say you were a lawyer once. They say you could help us." Rowan's face went ashen. "Go home, son. There's nothing I can do." The boy left crying, and Mara felt something inside her crack. 2 days later, she insisted on visiting her father. Rowan tried to dissuade her, arguing it wasn't safe, but she wouldn't hear it. Finally, he hitched the wagon and drove her into town, his jaw tight with tension the entire way. They found William Sullivan in his bed, barely able to breathe. His face was purple with bruising, his eyes sunken with pain. When he saw Mara, tears streaked down into his graying beard. "Baby girl," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." She held his hand while Doc Morrison examined him privately in the kitchen. When the doctor returned, his expression told her everything before he spoke. "Broken ribs punctured something inside. Internal bleeding I can't stop." Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'm sorry. Mara. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. Her father was dying because he'd stood up to Luther Blackwood. Dying because he'd tried to protect his neighbors. After the doctor left, William gripped her hand with surprising strength. "I have to tell you something. About the debt." "Papa, rest. We can talk later." There is no later. He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. The debt was a lie. All of it. I never owed Luther a cent. That contract was forgery. The world tilted. "Then why did you?" "Because he wanted you. Said he'd make you his 4th wife. And if I refused, he'd kill us both and take you anyway." William's voice broke. "I couldn't let that happen. And then Rowan came, offering money, offering protection. I sold you to save you. Baby girl. God forgive me. I sold my own daughter. Papa." No. But the words choked in her throat because she understood now. Everything had been manipulation. Luther's game, her father's desperation, Rowan's timely intervention. She'd been a pawn moved between powerful men, and the only one who treated her with dignity was the man everyone called a monster. "There's more." William reached under his pillow, pulled out a sealed letter. "For Rowan. Don't read it. Just give it to him when I'm gone. Promise me." She promised, though her hands shook so badly that she nearly dropped the envelope. "Is he good to you? Does he hurt you?" "He's kind, Papa. He's the kindest man I've ever known." William smiled despite his pain. "Then maybe I did one thing right. Maybe God gave me grace at the end." They sat together until evening, her hand in his, neither speaking because there was too much to say and no way to say it. When Rowan came to collect her, William looked at him with eyes that held gratitude and grief in equal measure. "Take care of her," William said. "With my life," Rowan replied, and it sounded like a vow. The townspeople came 3 days later, nearly 50 men, women, and children walking through the forest to find the cursed lumberjack's cabin. They gathered in the clearing, desperate and dusty, their faces etched with the kind of fear that came from watching your world collapse. "Please," said Thomas Gardner, who ran the general store. "They say you were a lawyer back east. They say you know the law better than any man in the territory." Rowan stood on the porch, his face carved from stone. "You heard wrong. We got nowhere else to turn. Luther's got the law in his pocket, got the money and the muscle. We need someone who can fight him legal-like. I can't help you. I can't or won't." The question came from a widow whose husband had died in the mines, leaving her with 4 children and a farm she was about to lose. "Both." Rowan's voice was flat, final. "Go home. Find another way." They pleaded. Some cried. A few got angry. But Rowan stood unmoved as granite, refusing to even discuss it. Finally, they left, their hope dying with each step back toward town. Mara waited until they were out of sight before rounding on him. "How could you? Those people need you. They don't know what they're asking. They're asking for help, for someone to stand up to a tyrant who's stealing everything they have." Her voice rose with each word, months of docile acceptance burning away in righteous fury. "You have the skills. You have the knowledge. And you're just going to let them suffer. You don't understand. Then make me understand. Because right now, you look no different than Luther Blackwood. A man with power who only cares about himself." The words hit him like physical blows. His face went white, then red. "Don't compare me to that monster. Then stop acting like one. Those children will starve. Those families will lose everything. And you're hiding in your forest like a coward." "I'm not hiding." The words exploded from him with 15 years of compressed pain. "I'm protecting something worth more than this town. More than those people. More than you can possibly understand." "Then tell me. Make me understand why you'd rather let innocent people suffer than—" "Because the last time I fought Luther Blackwood, he killed my family." The words echoed through the clearing, raw and jagged. "He burned my wife and daughter alive because I beat him in court. They died screaming my name, and I couldn't save them. So forgive me for not being eager to paint another target on the back of someone I—" He stopped, the unfinished sentence hanging between them like smoke. Mara stood frozen, his pain washing over her in waves. She'd known something terrible had happened, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that stole her breath. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know. Now you do." He turned and walked into the forest, leaving her standing alone in the clearing. They didn't speak for 3 days. The silence between them wasn't comfortable anymore. It was a wound that wouldn't heal, made worse by the knowledge that they were both right and both wrong. On the 4th day, word came that William Sullivan had passed in his sleep. Rowan found her in the garden, staring at nothing. The letter from her father clutched in her hand. He didn't say anything, just stood beside her until she was ready to move. Then he helped her into the wagon and drove her to town for the funeral. They buried William in the small cemetery on the hill. Only a handful of people attended. Most were too afraid of Luther to show public support for a man who defied him. Reverend Thatcher rushed through the service like he had somewhere better to be, and the whole thing felt as empty as Mara's chest. Luther attended, stood at the back with his arms crossed and that calculating smile on his face. As they lowered the coffin into the ground, he caught Mara's eye and mouthed words that made her blood freeze. "You're mine now." Rowan stepped between them. his body a wall, his message clear. Luther's smile widened, accepting the challenge. After everyone left, Mara stood alone by the fresh grave. She pulled out the letters her father had left, 2 of them. She discovered one addressed to her, one to Rowan. Her letter was brief. "My darling girl, forgive me for selling you like livestock. Forgive me for being too weak to protect you properly. Trust Rowan. He's a better man than I ever was. Be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. Love always. Papa." She cried then. Finally. Great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. For her father who died trying to do right. For her mother who'd never even got to hold her. For the girl she'd been who'd wanted nothing more than to teach school and read books and live a simple, quiet life. Rowan waited by the wagon, giving her space to grieve. When she finally approached, she handed him the second letter. He opened it carefully, and she watched his face change as he read. His jaw tightened, his eyes went wide. Then he folded the letter slowly and put it in his pocket. "What did it say?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "That I should protect you. That you're carrying a burden you don't even know about yet." He paused, "And that I should tell you the truth before it's too late." "What truth?" But he shook his head. "Not here, not now. Let's get you home." Home. The word felt strange applied to a cabin in the forest, but she realized he was right. That's what it had become. The only place she felt safe in a world that kept taking things from her. They rode back in silence, the weight of secrets and grief pressing down on them both. Neither could know that in less than a week. Those secrets would explode in ways that would change everything. That truth, when it finally came, would be more devastating than either of them could imagine. The fire started on a windless night, which should have been impossible. Mara woke to the smell of smoke and Rowan shaking her shoulder, his face grim in the lamplight. "Get dressed, fast. The town's burning." From the cabin porch, they could see the orange glow painting the southern sky. Even 15 miles away, the fire looked massive, hungry, consuming everything in its path. Within an hour, refugees began appearing at the cabin, families fleeing with whatever they could carry, children crying, men with faces black from smoke and desperation. Rowan moved with purpose she'd never seen before. He organized the chaos, directing families into the forest using paths only he knew. By dawn, he'd led nearly 200 people through a network of trails that shouldn't have existed, old Apache routes. He explained tersely, maintained in secret all these years. The trail ended at a hidden tunnel entrance beneath an outcropping of rock. Rowan lit torches and led them down into darkness, through passages that ran under the mountain itself. The tunnel was ancient, carved by hands long dead, wide enough for families to walk 2 abreast. It emerged in a valley on the far side of the ridge, where a spring provided water and the cliffs would protect them from the fire's reach. "Stay here," Rowan commanded. "Don't go back until I tell you it's safe." As he turned to leave, a young Apache man stepped forward to Dakota, who'd been among the refugees. His face was stricken with guilt. "I need to tell you something," Dakota said, his voice breaking. "The fire, it wasn't natural." Everyone went quiet. "I worked for Blackwood. Didn't know what he was planning, I swear. But I heard him tell his men to set it. Multiple points around the town. He wanted to force everyone out so they'd have to sign over their land rights to get his help. Rage transformed Rowan's face into something terrible. How many points? 5, maybe 6. Dakota was crying now. I didn't know he'd actually do it. I thought it was just talk. But I saw them ride out with torches, and I couldn't stop them. Someone lunged at Dakota, but Rowan caught them. He told us the truth. That takes courage. Save your anger for the man who gave the orders. By the time they returned to survey the damage, a third of Redemption Springs was ash. The church, the schoolhouse, 24 homes gone. What Luther's documents couldn't accomplish legally. His fire had achieved through terror. And in the aftermath, he appeared like a savior, offering shelter on his land, food from his stores, protection under his authority. The price was signing over their property rights, permanently. Some families, desperate and broken, began to sign. That night, Delson appeared at the cabin, moving faster than a man his age should be able. His face was drawn with fear. He knows. Delson gasped. Luther Blackwood knows you're alive. One of his men recognized you at the fire. He's coming for you, and he'll use her to do it. He pointed at Mara. He'll kill her to hurt you. Rowan went very still. Then I'll kill him first. No. Delson gripped his arm. He has 20 armed men. You're one person. He wins through force. You have to win through truth. What truth? He owns the sheriff. He owns the judges. The documents I have won't matter if no one's alive to present them. Then someone needs to present them. Someone he can't touch. Delson looked at Mara. Someone innocent. Before Rowan could respond, Delson began speaking rapidly, and Mara realized he was telling her everything. The whole story, holding nothing back. 15 years ago, Rowan McAllister had been one of Boston's most respected lawyers. He'd married Catherine Hayes, a school teacher with a laugh like music. They'd had a daughter, Emma, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn determination. Life had been golden, blessed, full of promise. Then the Apache case came. A corporation wanted to buy 10,000 acres of tribal land to mine for gold. The tribe refused. The corporation, led by a young businessman named Luther Blackwood, forged documents claiming the land had been sold. Rowan took the case pro bono, spent 2 years fighting, and won. The court ruled the documents false and granted the Apache permanent protection for their sacred ground. Luther Blackwood lost millions 3 weeks later. Rowan's Boston home caught fire in the middle of the night. Neighbors said it started in 3 places simultaneously. Rowan tried to reach his family's bedroom, but the flames drove him back. He could hear them screaming, Catherine calling his name, Emma crying for her papa. He tried 4 times to reach them. The burns nearly killed him, but he couldn't save them. He had to stand in the street and listen to his wife and daughter burn alive while the fire consumed everything he loved. The police called it an accident, bad wiring, a tragic coincidence. But Rowan found evidence, a witness who'd seen Luther's men near the house that night, carrying oil cans. When he tried to present it, the witness disappeared. Other evidence vanished. Luther's money bought silence and cooperation. Rowan had 2 choices: let his family's killers walk free, or disappear with the one thing Luther wanted most. The legal documents proving the Apache land was protected. The original court ruling, signed and sealed, that guaranteed those 10,000 acres could never be sold or seized. So Rowan McAllister died. Officially, the grief-stricken lawyer succumbed to his injuries a month after the fire. In reality, he fled west with a new identity, found his way to the Apache tribe he'd helped, and spent 15 years guarding those documents. Because if Luther ever found and destroyed them, the land protection would vanish. The tribe would lose everything, and his family would have died for nothing. "The documents are here," Mara whispered. "In the cabin, in a lockbox under his bedroom floor." Delson confirmed. "Along with evidence of every crime Luther's committed in 15 years, Rowan's been collecting it piece by piece, enough to put Blackwood away for life. But he can't present it himself. Luther would kill him before he reached a courthouse." Mara looked at Rowan, saw the truth written in every scar, every moment of isolation, every toy carved for children who would never know his name. He'd sacrificed everything: his identity, his life, his chance at happiness to protect people who feared him and land he'd never see. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice cracked. "Because the fewer people who knew, the safer everyone was." Rowan's face was anguished. "I never meant to drag you into this. I just wanted to keep you safe from Luther. I didn't know he'd..." He stopped, looked at her strangely. "Mara, when's the last time you had your monthly courses?" The question was so unexpected, so intimate and inappropriate, that she flushed crimson. I don't... Answer me, please." She tried to remember. She'd been so consumed with her father's death, with adjusting to life in the cabin, that she hadn't been paying attention. "I don't know. 2 months, maybe 3. Rowan closed his eyes. "God, no." What's wrong?" "Your father's letter. He said you were carrying a burden you didn't know about." Rowan's voice was hollow. "I think you need to see Doc Morrison." The next morning, nausea sent her running outside to be sick. She'd attributed it to grief, to stress, to the smoke still lingering in the air. But when Doc Morrison arrived and examined her, his face told her everything before his words confirmed it. "You're about 10 weeks along. Mara, congratulations." The world stopped spinning. 10 weeks. That put conception around the time before her marriage. Before Rowan, which meant the memory crashed over her like ice water. The afternoon Luther had cornered her behind the grain storage. How he'd grabbed her, his hand over her mouth, his weight crushing her into the dirt floor. She'd tried to scream, tried to fight, but he was so much stronger. Afterward, he'd warned her that if she told anyone, he'd kill her father. So she'd buried it deep, pretended it hadn't happened, tried to forget the violation and the shame. But bodies remembered what minds tried to forget. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She was carrying Luther Blackwood's child, the monster who'd killed Rowan's family, who'd terrorized her town, who'd murdered and stolen and destroyed. His child was growing inside her, and the knowledge was more horrifying than anything she'd ever imagined. She collapsed, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Doc Morrison tried to comfort her, but there was no comfort for this. Rowan had heard from the other room. She could hear him pacing, could hear the sound of something breaking. When Morrison left, Rowan came to her. His face was a mask of controlled anguish, but his hands were gentle as he knelt beside where she'd curled into herself on the bed. "You knew," she choked out. "My father knew. That's what the letter meant." I suspected. After I read what your father wrote about you carrying a burden. He reached for her hand, stopped, unsure if she'd want him to touch her. Mara, listen to me. This changes nothing about who you are. I'm carrying his child, the man who killed your family. How can you even look at me? Because you're not him. Rowan's voice was fierce. This baby isn't him. A child doesn't choose its father any more than it chooses when to be born. He took her hand despite her flinching, held it between both of his. If you want to keep this child, I will raise it as mine. I will love it as mine. No one ever has to know the truth except us. And if that baby grows up with one drop of decency, it'll be because of you, not him. How can you say that after what he did to you? Because I learned something in 15 years of bitterness and isolation. His scarred thumb traced circles on her palm, soothing and steady. Hate is a prison. Love is the only key that fits the lock. I won't let Luther Blackwood take one more thing from me, and that includes my chance to be a father again. She couldn't stop crying, but now gratitude mixed with the grief. This man, this impossibly kind man, was offering to raise the child of his enemy, offering her not judgment, but compassion. She didn't deserve him. They sat like that until the tears finally stopped, until she was empty and exhausted and clinging to his hand like a lifeline. A knock at the door shattered the fragile peace. Sheriff Owen McAllister stood on the porch, flanked by 2 deputies. His face was haggard, aged beyond his years. Behind him, 5 more men waited with rifles. "Rowan McAllister," Owen said formally, "you're under arrest for arson and attempted murder." Rowan stood slowly. "Owen, don't." The sheriff's voice cracked. "Don't make this harder than it is. You're really doing this after everything. I don't have a choice." But Owen's face said he was dying inside. "Luther knows who you are, knows you're alive. He gave me a direct order: bring you in, or he burns down what's left of the town and everyone in it." Mara stepped forward. "This is insane. Rowan saved those people. He led them to safety. And Luther says he started the fire to play hero. Says he's been causing problems for months." Owen wouldn't meet Rowan's eyes. "I know it's lies. I know what Luther is. But I got no power here. I'm just a man following orders to keep people from dying." "You always were good at following orders," Rowan said bitterly. "Even 15 years ago when you told Luther where to find me. When you sold your brother for 30 pieces of silver." Owen flinched like he'd been struck. I never thought he'd hurt Catherine and Emma. I just thought he'd scare you into dropping the case. When I found out what happened, He stopped, swallowed. "I've lived with that every day. It's killed me slower than any rope could. Yet here you are, still doing his bidding. Here I am." Owen gestured to his men. "Put the irons on him." Up, as they clamped shackles around Rowan's wrists. He looked at Mara. His eyes held everything. Words couldn't say love and regret and desperate hope. "The lockbox," he said quietly. "Under the bedroom floor. That's your wedding gift. If I don't come back, open it. Take it to Sacramento. To Judge Warren. He'll know what to do." "You're coming back," she insisted, but her voice shook. "Maybe." He managed a sad smile. "But if I don't, you're strong enough to finish this. Stronger than you know." They took him. Mara watched from the porch as they loaded him into a wagon. watched as the man she'd married, the man she'd somehow fallen in love with without realizing it, disappeared down the forest path toward whatever fate Luther Blackwood had planned. She stood there until long after they'd gone, one hand on her stomach where a child grew, the other pressed to her mouth to hold back the screams. Everything was falling apart. Her father was dead. She was pregnant with a monster's child. And the one good man she'd ever known had just been taken to face the demon who'd already destroyed him once. The lockbox waited under the bedroom floor. Her wedding gift. The truth that could save everyone or doom them all. Mara walked inside and closed the door. Then she knelt and began to pry up the floorboards. Because if Rowan McAllister could sacrifice 15 years for people who hated him, she could be brave enough to finish what he'd started. Even if it killed her. Even if she failed. She owed him that much. She owed everyone that much. The box came free, heavy with the weight of justice delayed, but not denied. Inside, the truth waited. And Mara Sullivan McAllister, 19 years old and terrified, knew her real journey was only just beginning. The lockbox was heavier than it looked, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax that had cracked with age. Mara's hands shook as she pried it open, lamplight casting dancing shadows across the bedroom walls. Inside, the truth of 15 years waited in neat stacks. The first document made her breath catch, a legal contract dated back before she was born, signed by territorial judges and Apache elders. It declared 10,000 acres of tribal land protected in perpetuity, untouchable by sale or seizure. The land described in the contract included the ground where Redemption Springs now stood. Every deed Luther Blackwood claimed to own was worthless. The town belonged to the Apache, who'd allowed settlers to live there peacefully. But Luther's forged documents meant nothing against this original covenant. Beneath it lay something even more devastating, a ledger documenting 15 years of crimes. Names, dates, witness accounts. 47 murders attributed to accidents or natural causes, each linked to Luther through meticulous evidence. Property seizures built on forged deeds. Bribes paid to judges, sheriffs, politicians. The fire that killed Catherine and Emma McAllister, with witness testimony from a man who'd helped set it and lived with the guilt ever since. Rowan had spent 15 years alone, collecting justice one piece at a time, building a case so airtight that even Luther's money couldn't slip through the cracks. At the bottom of the box lay a letter in Rowan's careful script. And reading it broke Mara's heart all over again. Mara, if you're reading this, I'm likely dead or imprisoned, which amounts to the same thing. This box contains everything needed to destroy Luther Blackwood and free the people he's terrorized. But I can't deliver it myself. Luther has too many eyes watching. Too many men willing to kill to protect him. I need someone pure enough that no one would suspect. Brave enough to finish what I started. I chose you not just to save you from Luther, but because from the moment I saw you in the market, I recognized something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. You are the best thing that's happened to me in 15 years of darkness. Thank you for trying to love a broken man. Please take these documents to Judge Warren in Sacramento. He's an old friend who owes me his life. He'll listen. This is my wedding gift to you, not wealth or comfort, but the power to save everyone. Use it well, and if God is merciful, I'll come home to you and the child we'll raise together. With all my heart, Rowan, Tucked beside the letter was a second ring, gold this time, not tarnished silver. Engraved inside, "For the woman who saved me." She slipped it on her finger next to the first ring. 2 bands, 2 promises. One to protect her, one because he loved her. Mara wiped her tears and stood. Sacramento was 150 miles through mountain passes and desert heat. Rowan sat in a cell, awaiting whatever mockery of justice Luther had planned. She had no horse fast enough, no gun to protect herself, no experience traveling alone. But she had the truth, and sometimes that was weapon enough. Delson found her packing supplies into a worn saddlebag. The old Apache took one look at her face and understood. "You're going to the capital. I have to. It's the only way. You're 3 months pregnant, exhausted, and Luther has men on every road." Delson shook his head. "You'll never make it alone." "Then help me." For a long moment, the old man studied her. Then he smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. "My son Dakota feels responsible for the fire. Let him take you. He knows routes the white men don't use. Old Apache trails through the mountains. Meanwhile, I'll gather warriors and try to free Rowan. Luther has 20 armed guards. I have the righteous anger of a people who've been stolen from too many times. Sometimes that's worth more than bullets." He gripped her shoulder. "But you must hurry. Luther plans to hang Rowan in 3 days. Call it frontier justice for the arson. If you're not back with legal authority by then, my brother will die." 3 days. 72 hours to ride 150 miles, convince a judge, and return with help. Impossible odds. But when had any of this been possible? Dakota arrived within the hour, his face set with determination and guilt. "I'll get you there. I swear on my father's name." They left at sunset, riding hard through forests that gave way to scrubland that gave way to desert. Dakota pushed them relentlessly, stopping only to water the horses and let Mara rest when she grew faint. The pregnancy made everything harder: nausea, exhaustion, her body fighting against the pace even as her will drove them forward. On the second day, crossing a canyon in the brutal afternoon heat, Mara felt wetness between her legs. Blood, not much, but enough to terrify her. She said nothing to Dakota, just pressed on, praying the baby would hold on as desperately as she was holding on to consciousness. Back in Redemption Springs, Delson moved like smoke through the darkness. He'd gathered 15 Apache warriors and 20 townspeople willing to fight. They surrounded the jail at midnight, faces painted for war, weapons ready. The plan was simple, overwhelming force to rescue Rowan before Luther could react. But they'd underestimated how many men Luther kept nearby. The fight was brief and brutal. 2 of Delson's warriors fell. 5 townspeople were wounded, but they got Rowan out, unconscious from a beating but alive. They fled into the forest with Luther's men pursuing, bullets tearing through the trees. One caught Rowan in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell hard and didn't get up. "Leave me," he gasped as Delson tried to lift him. "Get to safety. After 15 years of watching you sacrifice everything, not a chance." Delson hauled him up with strength that belied his age. "Besides, your wife is riding herself to death to save you. Don't make her a widow before she's even really been a wife." They made it to the hidden valley as dawn broke. Luther's men too afraid to follow into Apache territory. Doc Morrison worked on Rowan's shoulder, while the old warrior lay pale and sweating. drifting in and out of consciousness. Will he live? Delson asked. Morrison's face was grim. If the fever doesn't take him, if the wound doesn't fester, if his body can handle one more trauma after a lifetime of them. He wiped blood from his hands. It's in God's hands now. 300 miles away. Mara and Dakota thundered into Sacramento 70 hours after leaving the cabin. Mara was barely holding on, dehydrated, bleeding lightly, her body screaming for rest. But she'd made it. Judge Warren was a stern man in his 60s who looked skeptical when Dakota brought a half-conscious pregnant girl into his chambers, claiming to have evidence against Luther Blackwood. His skepticism died when Mara opened the box and he recognized Rowan's handwriting. "Dear God," Warren whispered, reading through the documents. "Rowan's alive. After all these years, he's alive. Not for long if you don't help." Mara's voice was hoarse but steady. "Luther Blackwood plans to hang him for arson. We have 3 hours before the deadline." Warren moved faster than a man his age should be able to move. Within an hour, he'd assembled a federal marshal, 6 armed deputies, and emergency arrest warrants. Within 2 hours, they were riding hard for Redemption Springs. They arrived as the sun began its descent, dust from their horses announcing their presence. Luther Blackwood stood in the town square, a noose already prepared. Rowan kneeling on the platform with his hands bound. "Stop!" Warren's voice carried across the square. "By authority of the Territorial Court, I order the immediate release of Rowan McAllister and the arrest of Luther Blackwood for murder, arson, fraud, and 47 counts of conspiracy to commit murder." Luther's face went through a remarkable transformation. Confidence to confusion, to rage to fear. "You have no authority here. I own this town. I own the law." "You own nothing." Mara climbed down from her horse, barely able to stand, but her voice rang clear. "This land belongs to the Apache people by federal decree. Every deed you forged, every claim you made, they're all lies built on stolen ground." She held up the contract, and the townspeople pressed close to see. "Rowan McAllister has been protecting this document for 15 years. Protecting all of you. Even when you called him cursed and drove him into isolation, he sacrificed everything so you wouldn't lose your homes. And this..." She held up the ledger, her hands shaking. "This is proof of every person Luther Blackwood murdered, including Rowan's wife and 5-year-old daughter. He burned them alive because Rowan defended the Apache in court." A murmur ran through the crowd, building to outrage. People who'd lost family members in accidents suddenly understood. Widows who'd been forced to sell their land saw the pattern. Everything Luther had built was constructed on graves and lies. "Arrest her." Luther screamed at his men, "Shoot them all." But his men were backing away, unwilling to fire on federal marshals. And the townspeople were advancing, fury transforming fear into action. The trial happened fast. Federal judges didn't waste time when the evidence was overwhelming. Mara testified despite her exhaustion, despite the cramping in her abdomen that warned her body was failing. She laid out every crime, every victim, every piece of evidence Rowan had collected. Luther's expensive lawyers argued and objected. But paper didn't lie. Signatures didn't disappear. Witness testimony from 40 people who'd been too afraid to speak before suddenly found courage in numbers. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted. People wept. Some cheered. Mara just felt empty. Relief and exhaustion leaving her hollowed out. 50 years imprisonment without possibility of parole, the judge declared. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none. Luther Blackwood was led away in chains, his empire crumbling behind him. Property returned to rightful owners. The Apache land protection was filed with the territorial government. Redemption Springs was saved. But Mara couldn't celebrate. Her vision was tunneling, darkness creeping in at the edges. The last thing she heard before collapsing was someone shouting for a doctor. She woke in a hospital bed, morning light streaming through windows. Her first thought was for the baby, her hand flying to her stomach. "Still there?" said a gentle voice. Doc Morrison sat beside her bed. "You pushed yourself to the edge and then some, but the little one held on. Rest now. You've earned it." Rowan, alive, fevered and weak, but alive. "He's in the next room, actually. Nick woke up an hour ago asking for you." Morrison smiled. "Stubborn man refused treatment until we told him you were all right." They brought her to his room in a wheelchair, too weak to walk. Rowan lay propped on pillows, his shoulder bandaged, his face gaunt, but his eyes bright when he saw her. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved everyone." "We did it." She took his hand, careful of his injuries. Together. The baby. Still with us. Apparently just as stubborn as its parents. Rowan's laugh turned into a wince. "Our child, not Luther's. Not anymore. Ours." She leaned forward carefully, and he met her halfway. Their first real kiss was gentle, tender, tasting of tears and triumph, and the beginning of something neither had dared hope for a future without fear. Outside the window, Redemption Springs began rebuilding, but inside that hospital room, two broken people started healing, stitching their wounds together into something that looked remarkably like love. 6 weeks passed before they were strong enough to leave Sacramento. Rowan's shoulder healed slowly, the fever finally breaking after 10 days that felt like 10 years. Mara regained her strength, the baby growing steadily despite everything her body had endured. They stayed in a boarding house near the hospital, learning to be together without crisis driving them, discovering who they were when survival wasn't the only thing that mattered. The territorial government sent officials to survey the Apache land and confirm boundaries. Delson and his people received formal recognition of their rights, protection that couldn't be revoked or stolen. The town of Redemption Springs was granted permission to remain, paying nominal lease fees that would fund the tribe's needs. It wasn't perfect, but it was just. When Mara and Rowan finally returned home, the entire town turned out to meet them. The same people who'd once feared the cursed lumberjack now lined the road with flowers and tears. Children waved the wooden toys he'd left anonymously all those years. Women whose husbands he'd saved from Luther's schemes stood with gratitude written across their faces. Thomas Gardner spoke for everyone. "We were wrong about you. 15 years we let you suffer alone because we were too blind and too afraid to see the truth. You saved us twice over, first by protecting our land, then by forgiving us enough to do it again." Rowan's voice was rough with emotion. "I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because it was right. We know. That's what makes you the kind of man we should have recognized all along." They erected a monument in the town square, simple stone carved with words that would outlast them all. Rowan McAllister, guardian. He walked alone so others could walk together. Rowan stood before it, Mara beside him. And for the first time in 15 years, he didn't hide his scars, didn't turn away from the crowd, just stood in the sunlight and let himself be seen. Sheriff Owen approached last, his badge missing from his shirt. I resigned. Wasn't right to wear it after what I did. He couldn't meet Rowan's eyes. I know, sorry doesn't cover it. Nothing covers betraying your brother. But I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. For everything. For 15 years ago. For handcuffing you when I should have been protecting you. Rowan studied his brother for a long moment. Owen had aged badly. Guilt etching lines deep into his face that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who'd been carrying stones too heavy for any back. "You're my brother," Rowan said finally. "Blood doesn't stop being blood just because we make terrible mistakes. I forgive you. Now you need to forgive yourself." Owen broke then, crying like he'd been holding it in for 15 years. The brothers embraced, and Mara had to look away from the rawness of it. Delson gifted them land in the hidden valley where he'd sheltered refugees from the fire. "Build your family here, near us. Let the past be past." Reverend Thatcher approached with shame coloring his weathered face. "I rushed your wedding like it didn't matter. Like you didn't deserve the dignity every couple deserves." He twisted his hat in his hands. "If you'd let me, I'd like to do it proper this time. Real vows, real witnesses, real celebration of what you've built together." Mara looked at Rowan. They'd married out of desperation and transaction. But what they had now was something else entirely forged in fire and tempered by truth. "We'd like that," she said. The second wedding happened on a clear autumn morning when the leaves turned gold and the air smelled of possibility. The church overflowed with people, townspeople, Apache families, children clutching wooden toys. Someone had woven wildflowers into garlands that decorated every pew. This time Mara wore a new dress. Simple but clean, made by grateful hands from grateful hearts. Rowan wore a suit that actually fit, his scars visible but no longer shameful. They walked down the aisle together, no one giving her away because she was choosing this, choosing him, of her own free will. Reverend Thatcher took his time with the ceremony. Speaking of redemption and second chances, of love that grows in unexpected places when we're brave enough to let it. "Do you, Rowan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward?" "I do." His voice was steady and sure. "I take her freely, gratefully, and completely." "And do you, Mara, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Through whatever comes," she looked at Rowan, really looked at him. Saw the man who'd given her safety when she had none. Who'd accepted another man's child without hesitation. Who'd sacrificed 15 years for people who hated him and asked nothing in return. "I do. With my whole heart." When Rowan kissed her, the church erupted in applause. This time there was music, laughter, a celebration that lasted into evening. Children played while adults danced. Delson played drums while others sang. It felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. That night, in the cabin they were building in the valley, Rowan held Mara close and felt her belly where their child moved beneath his palm. "Are you happy?" she asked. "I forgot what happy felt like for so long that I don't have words for this." He kissed her forehead. "But yes, more than I ever thought possible." 6 months later, in the deepest part of winter, Mara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was hard, but she was harder. When Doc Morrison placed the infant in her arms, she counted 10 perfect fingers and 10 perfect toes, saw eyes that would be brown like hers, and felt love so fierce it was almost frightening. Rowan held his son with tears streaming down his scarred face. "William," he said, naming the baby for Mara's father. "William Rowan McAllister." The baby was Luther's blood but would never know it. Would grow up loved and safe, taught to carve wood and read books and stand up for what's right even when it costs everything. Their cabin grew over the years, extra rooms added as 2 more children followed William. Rowan taught them all to work with their hands, while Mara taught reading and writing. The children played with Apache kids, learned 2 languages, understood that family was bigger than blood. On their walls hung 2 photographs, one of Catherine and Emma, honored but not hidden, and one of their new family. Not replacing the old, but walking beside it. Grief and joy existing together because that's what life was. Rowan never went back to practicing law, but he advised others who needed help. Never charged a cent, just offered what he knew because knowledge was meant to be shared. Mara eventually opened the school she'd always dreamed of, teaching children regardless of race or ability to pay. Her classroom had wooden toys in every corner, carved by loving hands. Years later, when they were gray and weathered themselves, visitors would ask about the monument in town, about the silent guardian who'd saved everyone. And Mara would smile, reach for Rowan's hand, and say, "He saved me first. Everything else followed from that." They'd sit on their porch in the valley evening, watching grandchildren play, and Rowan would ask the same question he'd been asking for 40 years. "Are you happy?" And Mara would give the same answer, true every single time, more than I ever imagined I could be. The sun would set over mountains that had witnessed their struggle and their triumph. Smoke would rise from the chimney. Children's laughter would echo through trees that had hidden a man's pain and later sheltered his joy. And in that moment, everything, every sacrifice, every scar, every lonely year would be worth it for the peace they'd built together. Home wasn't a place. It was this. It was them. It was choosing love when hate seemed easier. Choosing hope when despair seemed reasonable. Choosing to keep going when stopping would have been simpler. Home was a wedding gift that saved a town and 2 broken hearts that learned to beat as one. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Rowan and Mara's story reminds us that it's never too late for second chances, that love can bloom in the darkest seasons, and that the sacrifices we make in silence often speak louder than any words. How many of us have felt like that cursed lumberjack at some point, misunderstood, isolated, carrying burdens no one else could see, or like Mara, forced into impossible choices, but finding strength we never knew we had? Their journey teaches us that home isn't about the house we live in or the circumstances that brought us there. Home is about the people who see our scars and love us anyway. It's about choosing grace over bitterness, hope over despair, and building something beautiful from broken pieces. Life doesn't always give us the story we planned, but sometimes the unplanned chapters become the ones we treasure most. What wedding gift has life given you that seemed like a burden at first, but turned into a blessing? Have you ever met your own monster in the woods, only to discover they were exactly what you needed? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be the hope someone else needs to hear today.